Okay, so we start Shemot. Yay. So much fun. So we start off Shemot and we meet a new king. Or do we? Or do we, right? Chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. And this sets the tone for the enslavement. So let's maybe turn to this phrase. So who is this new king? Is there a new king? So start throwing things out. What do you know?
Yes, there's a new king.
So first of all, we know it's a machlokas. Rashi quotes machlokas Rav and Shmuel.
Right. In
two places in the Bavli. Is it chadash mamash or shenit chadesh b'gzerotav? Now let's in this case the Gemara is pretty explicit about the machloket. Why would you say that it's an actual new king?
It says new king.
Thank you, because it says Melech Hadash. They didn't have to overthink that one very much. Why would you not say that it's literal? What drives that day in the Gemara?
It says Vaychadash, no Vayakam.
No, it says Vayakam, but it doesn't say Vayamat. Right? It doesn't say Vayamat, which is really not a problem because this assumes that we're picking up exactly where we left off, and then you would have to have a depth rather than like hundreds of years have passed or at least some time has passed. How many kings have been in the interim? We have no idea. Right? The point is we're starting a new story. But fine, that's a machlokas already in the Gemara. Now, I was talking with Yoshua about this when he was writing Zvar Torah, but there is a version of the Midrash which is much more elaborate of it's a new gzera, which is not just it was a new gzera, but the king actually fought against the enslavement of the Jews and said, "Don't you remember what Yosef did?" And the people said,
Yes.
Populist uprising, would dethrone you, and basically, unless you're willing to do what we said, we're not going to listen. And then he changed his mind after some time having been dethroned and said, "You know what?
I'll come back."
But what is that midrash doing? It's reading Asher lo yadat Yosef, not as he didn't know him, but that he actively didn't know him, meaning he did know him, and then, in response to everybody else saying,
we remember as well.
We want you to forget about that. So he decided to trade in his integrity and not know Yosef in favor. And this appears in Tanchuma. I think it appears in Rabbah. I know it appears in Tanchuma, but I think the one that Yoshua and I were talking about was in Midrash Rabbah. But different versions of this. Now the Tanchum was obviously worse because this is not just they didn't know Yosef, like time had passed, but they did know Yosef and they were actively making themselves not know Yosef. Right? That's the conception of this midrash, which of course is, unfortunately, the more you know history, you know that this is true, right? You know somebody, so you know that they've done a lot of good for you, so you have to come up with something, and this happens. Take your pick of the expulsion from Spain, or right? Just follow the Barbanel's life, right? Things are great in Portugal. He's helping them. Oh, but, right? Whatever. Or Haman, right? Right? Mordechai saved his life. But we don't know about that yet. Right? It's not important yet. But Datayim Shonot, right? Whatever. Take your pick of Sefer where this happens, historical period where this happens. So, but that's two Deyon, and they have two very different conceptions. But what I want to do is just spell out, because we know these midrashim, so let's spell it out. If it's really a new king, so it could just be, the point is that, look, time passes, and the message sort of politically, theologically, is just remember, no matter what you've done, time passes, and people forget, and you move into a new era, and no matter what you do in one generation, 20 years down the line, voters don't remember. They just don't, right? That's just, this in American elections, right? People talk about this, right? No one remembers what you did at the beginning of your election, right? People start thinking about the campaign 2 years in, right? That's where they start pulling stunts, because people just don't remember, right? And that's the message. It's just, the tragedy of the people don't remember, and you move on. The other one is no, sometimes, right? Jealousy and the like, builds up to that type of thing. Now, in the Pirkei Elazar, it goes even farther, and it says it claims that at the end of the previous kingdom, after the Pharaoh had died, Yosef had actually taken over as king for 40 years, and that had that had brought the xenophobia to a climax, because here this external person who was a slave not only became second command, became king, and therefore the king emerged after Yosef had become king. Vayakam melech hadash asher lo yadat Yosef, which is not a second command, but they were just so upset by the fact that there had been this outsider who had become king that they were responding to that moment. Right? This was backlash against the previous king. Right? Again, lahavdil, without weighing in on politics, right? But the way certain people perceived the election of Trump, right? That it was a direct response to having had Obama. I mean, in a certain sense, that's probably true, right? Whether you agree with Obama or not, the fact that there was a response, right? That's the point, right? That there were people who were upset with the previous administration, and therefore they wanted to go to the exact opposite extreme, right? These things happen in politics. Okay.
It's like the Rambam. No, so you go to
I've
one
never
extreme.
heard Trump is like the Rambam.
No,
I don't know.
Not Trump is like the Rambam.
I got
You go
it.
one extreme, you go to the other extreme, and then you balance out. Yang 2020.
Amen. From your mouth to God's ears. Yes, we'll have a mid-level, totally boring president for the next election. Totally boring with no opinions. Right? Exactly.
Honestly, I can use the totally boring president.
Now,
How about wrong?
okay. Now there are certain Mefarshim who go farther than this and say the point is not there was just a new king or that there was new laws. What the Psukim are describing. And this is in Ibn Ezra and in Josephus and Surah Hamor and Shadal and whatever and Hoel Moshe is that the point here is there's a new dynasty, right? Not that there's a new king, but that's not the backdrop for this story. It's that there is a complete shift, that you begin a new dynasty, and therefore the kingdom is running on a completely different trajectory, and that's what leads to this point, right? You have this already in Josephus, right? And I'll read from Josephus, the English translation anyways, I don't know the Greek. And having in length of time forgotten the benefits they'd received from Joseph, particularly the crown being now come into another family. Now, obviously these are related, right? They didn't know Yosef, but the reason is because this is a new dynasty, and if you know anything about new dynasties, right? It's not just, they try not to be a continuation of the past, right? It's not like they're going to go. It's not necessarily that they hated Yosef. It's just whatever was true of the previous kingdom. We are a new world. It doesn't matter, right? We clear out. So again, you have this all the way going back to Josephus, but the Ibn Ezra says it. He says Shalohayu mizar hamelucha. This was someone who hadn't been of the kingdom. Now, the more modern commentaries, not even just all the way modern, but Shadal, Hoel Moshe, people like that who are writing 200 years ago, they actually try to figure out, okay, well, which dynasty was responsible for the enslavement of the Jews? So Shadal suggests that the brothers came during the reign of Hyksos, and now this is the subsequent dynasty, not of Hyksos. The Hoel Moshe says the opposite and says, no, the Jews came down during the one before the Hyksos, and this is the dynasty of the Hyksos. I don't know. We can talk maybe later about which dynasty it might have been, but they actually try to figure out which dynasty was it. Now the Surah Hamor, and this goes back to something that we said last week, or 2 weeks ago I think already, suggests, and this would tie some of our loose ends together, suggests that the reason there was a dynastic change was because of the unrest created by the economic policies of Yosef. Right? It was because everybody had lost their land, been moved around, been enslaved according to most Mefarshim, not the Ramban, and everything, that it led to complete rebellion. Right? The reason there was a new kingdom, a new dynasty, was because of the backdrop of the previous paragraph, which therefore, if what we said before, that Yosef's is in a certain sense responsible, whether politically or ethically, for creating the economic situation that led to the political regime change, this picks up with that, which is, after all of that, that put Egypt into such disorder that a new dynasty began, and it was that new dynasty that emerged in response to this resentment of the Jew having come in and created an economic system that disadvantaged them, that enabled slavery. Right? And therefore, when you read Vayakam melech hadash Yosef, right, certainly the Midrashim are pointing in this direction. Right? The Pirkei Elazar the king that emerged was in response to the fact that Yosef had been king for 40 years, right? You could just say, right, it's interesting that, right, many of these different commentaries, in fact, all of them can be read in that way, right? New Gzerot, same king, but the way the Tanchuma says it is, but think about it. Many of them, the commentators are pointing in this direction, however they understand it. Right? The Tanchuma is saying it was the same king. The populace was against Yosef because of everything that had happened. Paro was not, but he ended up giving in to the populace resentment against Yosef to keep his own throne. The Shor Amora says it's a new dynasty, and there was so much resentment against Yosef's economic policies that it led to regime change, and that's what enabled slavery, right? Or, right, the only one that sort of doesn't say this is, just a new king got up and whatever, he just didn't know Yosef, he forgot, right? But two out of three of these interpretations really go in the direction that Vayakam El Chadash, the backdrop of Shemot, is not just new king, new laws, new regime change, but is a particular set of political and economic policies and realities on the ground that had led to a situation in which Yosef was actively forgotten by the people who came in. Right? So there is the interpretation that is passive, right? Time had just passed, or there's new kings, right? But there are several substrains that tie into that say, no, this, right, Vayakam El Chadash is reminding you that the previous regime had set up the groundwork to enable slavery of Yosef's family, and now it's coming to fruition. Right now, it's coming back to bite them. Right, so that, right, all that again. This is where you always have to remember that Chumash, like, you have to read Al Haseder, right, and all the things we talked about in the problems then. Right, you have to keep in mind as you get to the beginning of Shemot. We know this pasuk. We knew all the day. You knew pretty much all the day, or at least basic. But to tie them in and realize what it's really saying in light of the ways that we interpret the previous parashot. Again, if you think that Yosef was totally fine and there was no resentment, so then you will just go, okay, people just forgot about it and they were ungrateful. But all these midrashim that say, no, there's a lot more going on, are pointing in the fact that you really have to remember all that could have been built up because of Yosef's economic policies and how that would lead to Melech Chadash and the slavery that ensues. Okay?